while the general consensus is that Tony dies at the end of The Sopranos, most of the discussion around the ending is whether or not he died and looking at the evidence of the last scene to determine this. And while nowadays it's pretty accepted that he died, although acknowledged it is open to interpretation, that seems to be the end of the discussion as to what his fate was, as if we were robbed of seeing what his fate would be. But as many have pointed out, he was actually shot in the beginning of season 6, and we can take the rest of season 6 to see how his life would have turned out if he was shot and if he died or if he survived. We see when he was going through that phase where he's Kevin Finity and it's sort of like the purgatory and he almost goes to the other side. So we do see what would have happened if he was shot and it was fatal, like what his experience would have been. And we also see what would have happened if he was shot and he survived, because he does survive, and then throughout his recovery starts to say that every day is a gift and that he's a new man. And this is in the opening episodes of season 6. And then he goes on to slowly get bored of this and end up in his old ways. And this shows that regardless of whether he is killed or not at the end of the series, that if he were to go on living, like, it wouldn't have changed him in the long run. Any change that he goes through, he reverts back to his original state. And if anything, he's, after flirting with, I guess, the high road and the low road, he's made peace that he will ultimately be on the low road. He might throw out concessions that he is a good guy or whatever, but he really is at the point of, he's gone past the point of no return, and this is evident throughout season 6. In the third last episode of the series, The Second Coming, it's clear that Tony will not be able to, I guess, get his family in order. The mafia side of things has gone down considerably throughout season 6, but this episode in particular shows that he will never be a good parent, and even if he has opportunities to have second chance, he will never claim it. Like when AJ attempts to commit suicide, both Tony and Carmela are unable to reflect on this accurately and make any changes going into the future. They've both chosen the low road, and there's this episode points that out very clearly. The episode opens with the asbestos that Tony is dumping, and he's trying to work out a deal with Phil Leotardo in order to who is going to take it on. And this is symbolic of Tony's impact on the wider community and his family. He has dumped the asbestos and will not clean it up. He might clean it up for a price if he can get good business out of it, but ultimately he's leaving that behind, and he's irredeemable at this point. Like, he won't repent for what he's done. Carmela is also not innocent, and this episode comes after Kennedy and Heidi, where Tony kills Christopher, then he goes out to Las Vegas, and in order to mend things with Carm, he sort of gets proactive and on the front foot about this. He buys her a gold watch. This is the same trick he's pulled a few times, like buying her the mink coat and the spec house, and now he's doing it with the watch. He does this almost exclusively when he cheats on Carmela, and then he buys her something to get her back on side. Carmela is stupid, but she's not stupid not to pick up on this pattern, so she should be able to work it out that that's what's going on. But instead of using the information before her, Carmela has accepted that this is her life, and any attempt of her to say that she didn't know is long dead, particularly after the the episode where she is told by the therapist that she needs to leave Tony and that she can never say she was never told, which happens in season 3. Then there's AJ, who attempts suicide in this episode, and you can see him with this therapist here, and he's doing what he normally does. He says he's complaining about a lot of political and social issues, and then takes away his own agency by saying, I'm one individual, what can I do? But then he complains that he can't catch a break, and he's following in the pattern of his parents, which is to not take responsibility for anything and complain. The only person who avoids this is Meadow. Meadow is not perfect, but in terms of the two paths, the high road or the low road, she definitely takes as closer to the high road out of any of the 4 direct family members, and she is the one person in this episode who actually does her best to be a supportive family member and not selfish. Tony is coming back from his peyote trip, and he tells the gang that he had this like transcendent experience. They're all listening to him, and the only thing he can really describe is that the sun came up. To which Silvio says, oh yeah, like, you know, he's open to Tony saying more, but he's not able to give them more because, again, like when he got shot and he said, every day is a gift, and then to his I get it at the end of Kennedy and Heidi, he has these moments that could change him, but they soon leave him, and he cannot hold on to them, and he doesn't improve. Then we get to the Second Coming poem by William Yeates, which is read out in one of AJ's college classes, and the poem reads, turning and turning in the widening gyra, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the centre cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world, the blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Surely some revelation is at hand. Surely the second coming is at hand. The second coming. Hardly are those words out when a vast image of Spiritus Mundi troubles my sight. Somewhere in sands of the desert, a shape with lion body and the head of a man, a gaze blank and pitiless as the sun, is moving its slow thighs, while all about it real shadows of the indignant desert birds. The darkness drops again. But now I know the 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle. And what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born. So this poem is very relevant to the situation at hand, with the show coming to an end, and its themes stretch further out than the impacts on just AJ. The falcon cannot hear the falconer. Like, the systems in place are falling apart. They're getting too wide, and Tony can't get through to his crew, but he and Carmela can't get through to AJ if they're even trying at this point. Melfi can't get through to Tony. It's like any person who's meant to be in control or have authority cannot get through to the people that they're managing. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Again, the family is falling apart and it's evidence with AJ, and this also mirrors Tony's work life, where he's on the verge of the point of no return with New York, which results in the anarchy, and then the ceremony of innocence is drowned, which of course AJ, listening to this, takes this literally, that he needs to be drowned and he is the innocent, but really it's a metaphor that all of the routines and the rituals of life are becoming obsolete or irrelevant. Even like the sit downs with New York are not going well. Like, they're not communicating. None of the family members are communicating. AJ who Carmela soon says is, was always the happy little boy. That's sort of long gone. And then the best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. So the best in this episode are Meadow, who is really like the most emotionally stable in the family, but is not given that role. Like, she says helpful things when she's around, but generally her path has been to distance herself from her family for her own safety. And the other best, I would say, is Melfi, who tries to offer solutions to Tony but can't get through. And when post AJ attempting to drown himself, the parents they just want to turn to blame and blame each other so that they don't have to take responsibility for what happened. Whereas Melfi sort of sees that his life is still there to save and that there's still work to be done. But in that room, Tony has more passionate intensity than Melfi has conviction, and he's able to not get the help to AJ because he is going to be certain and emotional and loud, and that can cause Melfi to second guess herself, which is another plot in the background, Melfi reconsidering if she should even be working with Tony. And I think this is even more clear with Tony and Carmela, who instead of having doubts, they just go all out in attack on each other over who's to blame for AJ's mental state, which is not helpful and it's not accurate, and they are just having this passionate intensity instead of working out how they're going to help their son. And then it says, surely some revelation is at hand, surely the second coming is at hand. And I think this ties in with Nietzsche's God is dead. Then, yes, it's like we're seeing a world where there's no religion, no shared values, no purpose. And in this meaninglessness, it seems that there should be meaning, and that the second coming of Christ will come and save everyone. But really, like, you need to create your own meaning in the world and not wait for the second coming to come. People have been waiting for the second coming for millennia, and it hasn't happened. So just like AJ with his therapist, and the therapist is trying to get him to do things, and AJ says, I'm only one person, what can I do? Well, everyone's only one person, and you have to do what's best. You have to be, make impact where you can. You can't be waiting for external factors to save you or blaming external factors for your shortcomings. And then the poem goes on to talk about the beast, and what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born. So what is the result? Like, what is the next thing that's going to rule us? And in this episode, it's sort of Tony, who represents this hollowness, this lack of faith, and this banal evil, sort of. And that is the new dominant force in this world. But of course, out of this deep poem, AJ only takes it to get an idea to be drowned, or to drown himself. And it's interesting that later on, Carmela says, how is this poem appropriate for college students? And it's like, well, it's comical because, how old do you have to be before you, listen to a poem? And again, it's not the poem that puts AJ over the edge. Maybe the drowning gives him a poetic thing to do, but it's really his own family life that has put him there. Then, so in Tony's life, the center cannot hold, so he's trying to work with Phil, and he's trying to reach out to him on a human level, and Phil just refuses. So it's look, even when Tony does reach out, it's like his environment is not supporting that. Like, it's not only Tony that's the problem, it's the general environment, and his work is falling apart as his family is. Then Meadow tries to console AJ, and AJ saying, I can't do anything, my condition. Meadow saying, and then AJ says that Meadow is more important. And then Meadow says, we're Italian, you're their son. Do you have any idea what that means? You'll always be more important. So that means AJ is the center of the next generation of the family, who cannot hold, because mentally he believes he cannot go on. He doesn't have anything to live for. Like, he has no purpose. And that's something that Tony and Carmela have not passed down to him. Yet, yes, AJ needs to take personal responsibility as well, but the family system has broken down. And then innocence is drowned. So AJ comes out downstairs and he looks like very depressed. And Carmela gives like this, you're awake, which is really just sort of not the best thing to say to someone who is probably not wanting to speak to family. And AJ doesn't say a word really when he's downstairs. Carmela, not obviously not knowing what he's about to do, so you can't blame her in this moment 100%, but she's sort of recognizes his energy but doesn't want anything to do with it, and like rushes off without really dealing with it. And yeah, she's not to know what's about to happen, but I think in this interaction, she leaves a bit to be desired in terms of being a comforting parent. I think Meadow does a much better job at being there for AJ. Then AJ attempts to drown. Now, this happens quite early in the episode, which is important because it shows that what is really important here is what happens after. Like, it's not really about AJ and him wanting to kill himself. It's more about Tony and Carmela's reaction to it. And, AJ actually doesn't die, so he's still alive. So it's like the question should become like, how do we, help him? But instead, like, the rest of the episode turns into like the blame game. So yeah, Tony saves him, says, what's wrong with you? Aggressively. And then, come on, baby, you're all right, baby. And, AJ's kind of pathetic, like he just wails and cries. And yeah, he has no conviction in even that moment. But yeah, Tony's first step is aggression and then overly babying him, which is not the worst thing to do, but yeah, it's probably not the best either, but it's far from the worst thing he does, because I guess he does save AJ here. But then, yeah, AJ gets drugged up and taken off to hospital, and I think, yeah, Meadow does a lot of the heavy lifting in the scene as well, where she says to Carmela, it's not your fault. Carmela starts crying and takes like that position as like the one that needs to be emotionally soothed, like straight away. So she's in no position to take responsibility or reflect on things, because she positions herself in that, people need to look after me. But she does compliment Meadow. She says, you warned us. But it's not really taking responsibility. It's just sort of flirting around the edges. Tony says it's going to be okay. Meadow, it will, Mum. So, it's not bad, but they're just sort of soothing each other, which I guess they have to do at this point. It's still raw, so it's not the worst thing for Tony and Meadow to be saying. And then Carmela says, he was always so happy. He was our happy little boy, which has not really been evident throughout the entire The Sopranos, but maybe in season one. But yeah, AJ's been battling with these demons for a few seasons now. And yeah, it's the ceremony of innocence that Carmela just thinks things are a certain way, but her her worldview should be shattered, that they're not. So then the question becomes, okay, well, what happens now? Like, how are we going to fix this? What now that he's not happy? Like, what can you do? Then Tony goes to work and talks to all the guys there, and he says about AJ, that stupid fuck. When did I lose this kid? What did I do wrong? So, first off, he blames AJ, which he could just completely avoid. Like, he's already started blaming him. Then he says, when did I lose this kid? Which sounds like the start of reflection that he might be trying to get somewhere and help him. But then he finishes with, what did I do wrong? Which is a self-pitying statement, and he's really only posturing at reflection. He's not really going to get there. Like, he's blaming AJ, then pretending he's going to reflect, but then ending in self-pity. And then all the guys sort of have Tony's back because he's their boss, but maybe even if they didn't, they wouldn't have anything to say, but they just blame other things. Like Silvio says, don't blame yourself, T. It was probably a chemical imbalance, which is a very vague and non-specific thing to say. Doesn't really mean anything. And if it was a chemical imbalance, like, what was it? Like a drug thing or depression thing or hormonal thing? Like, it's just not really giving much. And then Paulie chimes in with, ask me, it's all these toxins they're consuming. It fucks with their brains. Between the mercury and fish alone, it's a wonder more kids aren't jumping off bridges, which is so ridiculous, but it kind of shows how stupid it is to externalize blame for everything. So while not everyone would say it's the mercury in fish, it's, people are saying it's a chemical imbalance, which is basically just as ridiculous. And even, Tony and Carmela's argument that they're about to have about whose parents and what lineage is to blame is, again, externalizing blame and not taking responsibility. And then here comes the scene with Tony and Carmela. So this is their first time together since the hospital, and they're going to have... Things have calmed down a bit, so it's like the emotions are a bit lower. And this is what I talk about, where it's like talking about Tony's fate, and you can throw Carmela into like what both of their fates, and here you can see like what their fates are, because they don't change. Like, that despite what has happened with AJ, despite these wake-up calls, because fate is not only death, but like, will you change? Will you pick the high road or the low road? And they've just had a wake-up call, which in some interpretations could be like a sign, or some divine intervention that you got another chance. Like Tony's, every day is a gift now, like these second chances in life. And this scene shows that they could have a million second chances and they're never going to change. It doesn't matter if they're shot at the end of the series or not, or what happens. Like, we've seen, this is their fates. Their fates are to be horrible to each other and never learn. So Tony sits down at the kitchen table, says, I'm depressed. And then Carmela just like gives him this death stare and says, excuse me. And then Tony is a bit confused, says, I'm depressed. Carmela, I'm telling you, don't you start now. Because she doesn't want the energy to be taken away from her. She's already had to deal with AJ, who's taken the number one energy spot for a day. And that's too much for Carmela to deal with. Like, she can't support him and Tony. Like, it's just not, she's not capable of not being selfish. I'm not saying that Tony's perfect or whatever, but Carmela is, she's just been given a wake-up call, like, hey, maybe your son is not in the state that he thought he was. Then her husband says he's depressed, and she says, don't you start now. Then Tony continues, what does that mean? And Carmela says, it means what it means. I have enough on my plate. I don't need you adding to it with your bullshit. When she says it means what it means, it's basically a meaningless statement. And it's a bit like Tony later in the episode with Melfi saying that he doesn't have any idea what his parody trip means. Like, Carmela doesn't really know what she's saying either, like what those exact words mean, but she refuses to elaborate beyond playing the victim herself. And like, she has enough on her plate doing what exactly? Like, she's unemployed. You know, she goes to see AJ in the hospital like twice. So I don't know like what she's got on her plate, but she's not able to support anyone basically in any way at all. Then the term bullshit diminishes Tony's existence completely, which would basically be the point of no return. I think in a relationship, if someone was to say that, like, you would have to probably leave. But also given what we've seen out of Tony, like, especially with how he and Melfi go in the next episode, and then with AJ's therapist, and how he spent all these years in therapy basically not getting very far. To call what he does bullshit it's somewhat fair. It's a very harsh thing to say in without context, but given the context we have, it is somewhat fair. And Tony continues, bullshit, it's an illness and it's fucking hereditary. And then Carmela says, thank you, I know. I am intimately acquainted with the Soprano curse, which is a horrible thing to say to someone that you're married to. But the thank you is her being genuinely relieved and it's the beginning of her trying to shake any accountability for what's happened to AJ. Instead of trying to help, she's just trying to get out of taking accountability or blaming herself. Like, that is the most important thing for Carmela, and it becomes the most important thing for Tony, and they end up in sort of an alliance against AJ to absolve themselves of blame. But for now, they're fighting for power, for the blame amongst each other. And yeah, it is similar to Silvio calling it a chemical imbalance, and Paulie talking about the toxins in fish. It's blaming an external mythical factor like the Soprano curse, claiming that their family is cursed instead of actually dealing with their own lives and their role in everything. So yeah, Tony says, what are you saying? Carmela says, he didn't get it from my family, that's all I'm going to say. That's all I'm going to say basically means that she's just talking absolute bullshit. Like, she's just trying to blame him. It's not helpful. She's just trying to avoid blame. So there's no point in elaborating because she doesn't really have any truth that she's going off. She's just trying to fight for power in terms of not taking responsibility, because she can't help AJ because she's like hopeless. Like, she can't really help anyone. Like, Meadow has surpassed both her parents, and but AJ needs help and Carmela is not able to give it, so the best she can do is just fight for her own position. Then Tony sort of talks about Carmela's family dysfunction, and this is where he gets in on the game of blaming like her family, as just after Carmela's blamed his family, he sort of says, well, what about your family? Which again is missing the point of AJ, and they're so far away from the issue at hand at this point. But they're in their passionate intensity, their familiar dynamic, which is just blaming each other for things. Like, this is their comfort zone, reflecting on AJ not having the will to live and see no purpose in life is too far away, so they just avoid that by getting into this argument, which is sort of mutually beneficial because it allows them to argue instead of focusing on AJ. Then Carmela says, "You've been playing the depression card until it's worn to shreds, and now you've got our son doing it," which is very harsh, but it's pretty accurate with Tony, given his lack of development or improvement. And for him, it is the card because he does pull it out. And sometimes when you watch the show, it's like you can feel empathy for Tony because in the context of the scene, he is harshly dealt with, say, by Carmela. But in terms of like a life, he is like, if he just started doing that every time something went bad and so he could avoid responsibility, like, it would get pretty grating. But I think it is harsh for her to say that about AJ. Then Tony says, card, Carmela, you heard me. And Tony ends with a fuck you, and Carmela rips the watch off and throws it at him. So, yeah, the question is, which one is it? Is it the card, or is AJ really suicidal? Last scene, Carmela was crying about him, but now she doesn't care and saying it's just a card. I think she does care, but can't comprehend it, so pivots between blame and self-pity to avoid facing that she doesn't know what's going on and to avoid reflection. Then we get Tony's first visit with Melfi of the episode, and after everything that happened with Carmela, Tony is stuck in this blame game mode and cannot hear the Falconer when she is trying to get through to the Falcon to help him. So she says it could have been a cry for help, which indicates that AJ is seeking attention and that the opportunity is still there to listen to him. But Tony is already on the path that, he's just trying to work out how this happened instead of how it can be fixed from now on. When he was talking with Carmela, they never once touched on how to handle it from here. They just talked like it was over and tried to assign blame. Tony rejects Melfi's claim, saying that AJ is an idiot, and then pivots to self-pity about him and Carmela, saying we were just getting along so well. So clearly, like, his thoughts about Carmela are more important to him than AJ. So AJ's cry for help has actually not worked. Tony, given the opportunity to reflection, has not done that. Tony talks about heritage, to which Melfi rejects, saying, do you think there are other reasons why your son is so unhappy? Tony says he's got the world by the balls, every possible advantage, and one little pothole, and he goes into hysterics. Melfi just sort of sits there and lets him speak, and Tony continues, I'm not taking the rap. Not completely. She coddled him, his mother. I said it before, every little problem she's right there to pick him up and wipe his little tear on her apron string, which does not really seem accurate. Like, maybe a little bit, but I think even Carmela is not fully coddling AJ. I think she gives AJ a little bit of thought, but mainly is interested in how AJ fits into her life. She doesn't really see him or get him on any level at all, but it is convenient for Tony to be able to blame her. Melfi, kind of sensing where the conversation's going, says, are you ashamed of him? And Tony says, yeah, actually I am. Coward's way out. So none of this is Tony trying to help his son. He's just trying to, put blame on Carmela, and then he puts blame on AJ himself. Then Carmela goes to visit AJ in hospital and says, And AJ says, is he still mad? Talking about his father. And Carmela says, he was never mad. He loves you, which, love is a word that is used to avoid specifics. It's a meaningless word when accompanied by nothing else. Carmela's performing care, but it's shallow. She's, requiring AJ answer properly, asking these like shallow questions. Doesn't seem that bad, but the focus is not on AJ and how to improve him. It's just Carmela trying to get through the interaction, and like all of these empty interactions over time add up to nothing, which is where AJ is feeling that life has no meaning. And even the question like, is Tony still mad, shows that it's the emotional center is not with AJ. Even in this moment, he's still worried about how his family perceives him, which means they're not reassuring him that he is cared for. And then there's the drama with Coco and Meadow, which allows Tony to do what he does best, and he takes out his emotions physically by almost killing Coco. And while this is sort of a Sopranos specific thing, like this is what the whole show is. It's like having, your family and then your work, and Tony, like this could be like anyone getting stuck into work instead of dealing with their personal lives, which a lot of people do. They think, well, as long as work's okay, then everything's fine. But this episode showing the family falling apart, and Tony's like overcompensating by working harder. Meadow keeps talking to Carmela when she's talking about Patrick Parisi, who she started to date. And she says, I knew you and Daddy never liked him. Carmela says, it's not that we didn't like him, it's just... And then like trails off, doesn't say anything, and it's like Carmela is not able to produce not even deep thoughts, but like she's not even able to be clear with what she feels or thinks. She just has opinions but can't put them into words. And then like Meadow, despite Carmela's limitations, is able to infer how she feels, build her own life, act accordingly, and still communicate clearly with Carmela on her terms. But yeah, Carmela, I think this is a very bad episode for her. And she tries to turn the tables back on Meadow, saying, so suppose all the times you said you were staying at your friend Kimmy's in the city, you were actually staying at his apartment, which is her trying to reassert parental control and subtly frame Meadow as misbehaving by keeping secrets, as Carmela wants to know everything so she can control her kids but not help, as we can see that she doesn't really help either of her kids much at all. Meadow says sometimes, and yeah, Meadow knows that there's no point trying to win arguments, so she just lets her mother have her points. She doesn't argue and lower herself. Then Meadow says that, look, there's something else, to which Carmela rolls her eyes, pauses, and says, what? Which, she just said that she doesn't want Meadow to have secrets, and then she proves that she's incapable of listening, even when her daughter wants to like volunteer information. She punishes her with her non-verbal communication. And then Meadow says, I'm not going to med school. Carmela, what? Why? Meadow, it's so hard. Carmela isn't everything that's worth doing. Which is just a ridiculous thing to say, given that Carmela did not do any college, let alone really achieve much at all. Like, she's a homemaker whose family's falling apart. Meadow says, you have no idea, which is completely fair. Carmela, of course not. Which, again, repeats this pattern of, instead of listening, she just takes it as a personal attack and claims the emotional victim role, which should be about AJ in this episode. But again, they don't even really speak about him here or anything. It's like, it's just about Carmela once again. To which Meadow closes with, "Don't get sarcastic," and she knows not to give in to Carmela here. Then there's a scene in the middle where Melfi is speaking with her therapist, and it's sort of setting the stage for the next episode where she cuts Tony as a patient, and it's sort of very stark, the difference between when two functional adults talk, or like people who can have intelligent conversations. You know, despite Melfi's flaws, like she's still miles ahead of Tony and his family. But yeah, it's just a nice, I guess, comparison to Tony. And then there's this group therapy session with AJ, his therapist, Tony and Carmela, and AJ opens with, "It's always what you think, it's never how I feel," which is sort of a pretty, like, it's strange that he decided to have think and feel, because they're sort of interchangeable in terms of like what he's saying. Like, it sort of sounds deep, but it's not. It's just, what he's basically saying is it's just all about you and not about him, which is really accurate given Carmela is sort of the emotional center of everything. You know, and if it's not her, then it's Tony. Like, they've both got pretty big claims to that, but it's definitely not AJ. But it's just the way he worded it just sounds pretentious. And then Tony says, "Oh, poor you, it's all your mother's fault, is it?" Which is very hypocritical, because that's where Tony, that's sort of like the one revelation he had in therapy, is that his mother was to blame for a lot of things. But what he's doing here is defending Carmela, and by extension himself. He and Carmela are sort of forming an alliance against AJ here. Like, this is maybe what people talk about if you have like some sort of, I don't know, any kind of group therapy, like where one person might feel that the therapist and the partner like gangs up. This is what's happening, but without the therapist, it's just Tony and Carmela just ganging up on him. AJ continues, "I didn't say that," which is sort of inaccurate, because that's sort of what he did say. So yeah, no one here can form any constructive conversation. They're just emotionally defending themselves and sparring at each other, while feigning that they are trying to work on things together. Then Tony says, "You're a mama's boy." AJ says, "You're going to call me names now," which is a pretty fair comment. And Carmela chimes in with, "No one is calling anyone names," which is completely inaccurate, and now just shows that she is also colluding with Tony, even though the last scene they had was a blow up. But they had their blow up, you know, they decided, okay, well, we can feel good about ourselves by blaming each other, but now with AJ, we will defend each other. AJ brings up something that happened at his confirmation. Carmela instantly denies this instead of listening. Then, when pressed, blames AJ instead of addressing the issue or trying to work through it. Then they're talking about, the weed that he had at the confirmation. AJ says, "Did it ever occur to you they might have been self-medicating?" Tony says, "Give me a break, will you?" Which is somewhat fair, but, you know, again, he's not listening, and he's being hypocritical, especially after he just was talking about the benefits of the peyote that he did. AJ talking about the dorky raincoat that got him beat up is ridiculous, and, you know, shows that he doesn't really get it either. Like, he has some fair points. He hasn't had the best upbringing, but he's also just a bit of an idiot to bring up things like that. Then clearly they were talking about the poem, The Second Coming, and Carmela says, "What kind of poem is that to teach college students?" Again, blaming external factors, now the college. Then they blame Livia, which is again ironic. After Tony had a go at AJ for blaming his mother, he finds a way to blame his own mother in the same session. And then we get to the final session with Melfi for the episode. And again, I think this just shows, like, no matter what would have happened to Tony, like, he would not have improved. Like, he was past the point of redemption, and just because in the final scene, like, we don't see what happens, it doesn't mean that we don't have enough information to know that. In this episode, he's, should have got this huge wake-up call that his son is about to, commit suicide, or that at least spiritually, that's how he feels. He feels that, life's not worth living. So what does Tony take out of that? He says to Melfi, "Why me, huh? Doesn't every parent make mistakes?" Which is true. Every parent does make mistakes, but he's actively still making them, and he hasn't done anything to amend his mistakes. He still sees bad things happening to him, doesn't see himself as an active participant in his life. Melfi gives him sort of this look of disdain that she's, it sort of leads up to what happens next episode, but she's on the way out with Tony. She just, I think, in the next episode needed that nudge, but she's already seen that this is hopeless. She says, "Why not you?" Tony says, "Because I'm a good guy," basically. But the word basically is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. And again, it's an overly simplistic view of the world that I'm a good person, so nothing bad should happen to me. It's comical because Tony's saying it because he's obviously not a good person, but I think a lot of people in the world think this way who, maybe they're better than Tony, but just even if you're like a good guy doesn't mean that nothing bad's going to happen to you and that you don't have to work through problems. Then Tony says, "I love my family." Again, the word love used to not be specific in how he loves his family. Melfi's sort of just not really saying anything, so he just continues rambling and says, "There's a balance. There's a yin and a yang." Which is just, like, I don't know, like, what he's even talking about here. Like, he's not getting into specifics at all. He's clutching at straws and not taking accountability. And then he continues, "You think you think you'd learn something." But he's doing nothing to learn anything in these sessions. He's just avoiding blame. And all of this, everything that he said here, like, this is pretty ridiculous, but it's, if he wanted to interpret that it's not ridiculous and that it's just a hard thing that he's going through with what happened to AJ, like, it's just the opportunity cost of words, of him using all of these words, so, saying that he's a good guy, that he loves his family, instead of addressing the AJ issue and trying to improve it. Like, he's wasting time talking about, using platitudes and things instead of helping himself. Melfi says, "No, what?" And Tony starts to talk about his peyote trip, which again, it could be something that he's learned, but he fails to explain the meaning. The only thing he says is, everything we see and experience is not all there is. Melfi continues, "What else is there?" Tony, "Something else," which is, it's the start of something, but again, it's too vague. And he's just talking about it to avoid dealing with the AJ issue. Then says, "That's as far as I want to go with it. I don't fucking know." Which, is a bit like Carmela saying, "That's all I'm going to say about it." Like, neither of them knows. Neither of them has the answers. They're both being given plenty of time in this episode to share their thoughts, and they've blamed each other. They've blamed external factors, and they've run out of things to say. And the therapists, the two therapists, are both at a loss as to what to do with them. Yeah, and then Melfi says alternate universes, like giving him an option. Tony, what, are you going to be a fucking comedian now? Melfi says, I'm not, with this sort of unlimited patience that she has. Then Tony says maybe. Like, so he accepts her olive branch after he just rejected it. Yeah, then talks about the mothers as bus drivers theory, and he says you had these thoughts and you almost grabbed them, but then, and it trails off. And I think that's a fair point in terms of the mysteries of the universe and knowing what's going on. You think you might have revelations as to the nature of reality, whether there's a greater power or whether there's not, and how that looks. But that is not, the mysteries of the universe is different to how you should run your family. Like, you shouldn't have to be like almost grabbing thoughts or almost learning something. Like, he should have learned his lesson with AJ and he should have been there for him instead of blaming him. It's not on the same level as like a once in a lifetime peyote trip where you might get some insight that you can't put into words. Like, it's just the same issues over and over again, and no matter how often they happen, he's going to come up short. The final scene where he goes to the hospital, he brings the pizza and the nurse says, oh, you can't bring that in, which is sort of a small moment, but it shows that him and Carmela are not communicating because AJ told Carmela she can't bring in food. So, I don't think she would have had to tell him that. It's not like that important, but it just shows that outside of the therapy where they're just showing up, like they haven't deeply communicated about what's going on. And they're very happy to blow up at each other to then avoid having to look at things clearly. But yeah, overall, it's this episode, along with several others in season 6, show that while Tony's final fate at the end of the last episode may be unknown, we do see the patterns that he keeps repeating throughout his life, and that even if he had survived at the end of the last episode, this is how the rest of his life would have gone. It would have been meaningless, and he would not have found redemption. He's given opportunity time and time again, and he comes up short every time. Thank you if you made it this far. Let me know what you think or any of your favourite Sopranos one-liners in the comments. Thanks.